Last week I played a downscale version of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. This time around I will be testing out a different rule set which I have been wanting to try out for some time. Age of Fantasy from One Page Rules by Gaetano Ferrara, so this video will be a kind of review too, I guess. Not a paid review, it's not like I'm a proper YouTuber or anything, just my unsolicited opinion. You can get the basic rules and faction lists for free from their site, link below. There are 3 versions of Age of Fantasy. The default one, the skirmish one and Regiments. The one I will be playing is Regiments, because I like rank and flank style games. I find the maneuvering more interesting. Since I'm going to go over this from the ground up including preparation, I will be leaving timestamps for all the sections below, so you can jump to any bits that interest you. One of the great things about these rules is that they're short. As Discourse from Discourse Miniatures pointed out a while ago, it's great that you don't need to read 2 books to figure out what your troops do. Granted, there are more pictures than words in these books, but to an absolute beginner they can still be pretty intimidating, so concise rules are good. Unless you're not into this whole brevity thing. The units in the game are described by 2 statistics and some attributes. Quality is used to see if your troops hit stuff, whether by shooting or in close combat, as well as for morale tests. Defense is used to see if they avoid injury when they get hit. In both cases you need to roll equal to or more than the given number on a 6-sided die, so low numbers here are good. One thing I found a bit weird here is that the difficulty to hit something is always the same for a given unit. It doesn't matter if they're fighting a ninja or a stuffed pillow, the odds of hitting are always the same. On the plus side, it does make the game move along much faster. The adjectives add special rules to the unit. For example, the Elf Prince has Hero, which lets him lead other units, and Tough 3, which means he can take up to 3 wounds before he is removed from the game. The common adjectives are listed on the main rules, and any that are specific to a faction will be on that faction's list. I like the system of applying special rules, and because they're very consistent, it's easy to play without having to constantly refer back to the rules. Weapons are equally straightforward. Each weapon has an attack number, A, which tells you how many dice to roll per troop. For example, the Elf Prince has A3, and that means he rolls 3 dice. Some weapons have a range value like longbows for the archers. That means that they can shoot once, for A1 up to a range of 30. Finally, some weapons also have attributes, which add special effects. For example, the heavy cavalry lances have impact 1, which means they can score a free automatic hit if they charge into combat. Like many tabletop wargames, one-page rules uses a point-buy system, so both sides can have armies that are more or less equivalent in power. You agree with your opponent about how many points you will field, and then pick units from your faction lists up to that many points. In this case I'm going to 1500 points per side. For example, I want some warriors in my elf army. These guys come in blocks of 10 and cost 115 points. Under upgrades, the warriors have D and E listed, which means they can pick upgrades from these tables. The E list gives them some weapon upgrades, so let's say we pick spears, which give them the phalanx special rule. We'll talk about that later. And bumps up their cost by 30 points. The unit now costs 145 points. 10 spearmen won't last very long in the field, so let's say we want to bump the unit size to 20. We just need to get another block of 10 with spears and put them together into a single unit. But bear in mind you can only do this if they are all equipped in the same way, so you can't have a unit where half the troops have spears and the other half have their basic weapons. So our unit cost is now 290 points. List D gives us some further unit upgrades. A sergeant, banner and musician, which all give them a boost in close combat. I'll pick all 3, and the unit cost is now 315 points. Rinse and repeat till you fill your points budget and you have an army. Once you have your armies, it's time to set up the battlefield. It's up to you and your opponent to decide what terrain to put and where. Once you set that up, you can mark off the deployment areas, that's 12 from each long table edge. This is where the armies will set up. Normally the game is played on a 6x4 foot table, but once again I will be using my downscaled map where 1 cm represents 1 inch in the normal rules. Next you put down some mission markers. In the system you do not score points for destroying units, instead you need to capture objectives. You get die 3+2 objectives and you and your opponent take turns placing them anywhere on the battlefield outside the deployment zones, and at least 9 away from each other. To capture an objective, one of your units needs to be within 3 of it at the end of the turn. If there are no enemy units within 3, that becomes yours. Once you take an objective, it's yours until an enemy unit gets within 3, in which case they take it themselves. To win the game, you need to be holding more objectives than your opponent at the end of the 4th turn. I like this because it forces you to stay on the move, although I still have to play a few games with slow moving armies to see how that plays out. There are also optional rules available for different scoring methods which are neat, but let's stick to the basics for now. These markers I'm using are from the Song of Ice and Fire tabletop game, but hey, they do the job. One last thing to do before you start to play. Each player rolls a die and the highest gets to pick which deployment zone they want. Then you take turns placing one unit at a time. Once all units are deployed, the player who started the deployment takes the first action. In this case, the goblins won the roll and took the south side. The one-page rule system uses alternating activation. One player picks a unit that has not activated yet this turn, takes all actions with it, and then control passes to the other player. In this case, the goblins moved, but since there is nothing in range of their short bows, their activation ends. Next, the elf archers move up and shoot at the goblin archers opposite them. There are 10 elves with 1 attack each, so that's 10 dice. The unit has a quality of 4, so dice that roll 4 or better are hits. The unit also has a sergeant, so one of the dice has a +1 bonus. It will hit on a 3 or better, and we can just use a different color die to tell it apart. 6 arrows hit the goblin archers, who have a defense of 6. That means that they need to roll 6s to avoid injury. One of them makes the save, and 5 goblins are down, and that ends the activation for the elf archers. Next, the goblin spearmen rush forward. Normally units move 6, but they can rush or charge at double rate. If they do that, they cannot maneuver much or shoot any ranged weapons, but these guys only have spears, so they don't need to worry about that. After the archers on both sides exchange a few more shots, the elven light cavalry swoops down on the next objective. This unit has the fast attribute, which means it can move 9 instead of 6. They also double their move when they're rushing or charging, which is plenty to get them where they need to be. Next, the stone thrower shoots at the light cavalry. It has the indirect fire attribute, so it can do so even if they're hidden behind the woods. My reasoning here was that since the objectives are only taken at the end of the turn, if they could wipe out the cavalry, that marker would remain open, denying the elves a point. It would also stop them from sneaking to steal other objectives. The stone thrower hits, so now its other attributes come into play. The thrower has blast 6, so it will assign 1 hit to up to 6 members of the unit it hits. There are only 5 in this unit, so the extra hit is discarded. It also has armor piercing 2, so the defenders need to subtract 2 points from the dice they roll to their save. If they normally save on 4, for example, they need a 6 to save against a stone thrower. The light cavalry's armor is 5, so they would need a 7 to save, but since 6 is always counted as a success, they still have a hope. Against the odds, 1 elf survives. Since this unit lost more than half its members, it needs to take a morale test. This is just a roll higher or equal to its quality, just like in shooting. And the morale holds. As the armies maneuver around, the wolf riders shoot down 2 elves. The elven bolt thrower shoots the troll giant, but nothing gets through. At the end of turn 1, the 2 armies are holding 2 objectives each. No one gets the objective in the middle yet, because there are units from both sides within 3 of it. At the beginning of turn 2, the stone thrower takes a shot at the Phoenix warriors, but misses. Next, the Phoenix warriors charge into the giant. This is going to be a tough fight. The giant has a defense of 2 and regeneration, which makes him very hard to kill. On the other hand, the Phoenix warriors have halberds, which give them rending. If they roll 6 to hit, they get to ignore armor and regeneration, so they're the elves' best shot at taking the giant down. In one-page rules, the first 2 ranks of unit can attack. That's all 10 elves, so 10 dice. 9 of the dice hit on a 3 or better, and the remaining 1 hits on a 2 or better because of the sergeant upgrade. They get 1 6, so that's 1 wound on the giant, bypassing all defenses. All the other hits fail to get through the giant's save. Next, the giant gets to counter-attack. He hits 3 times, and because he also has armor piercing 2, the elves are saving on a 6. One of them makes it, but not all is lost for the other 2. Phoenix warriors have regeneration, so they can ignore wounds if they roll a 5 or higher. Yeah, never mind, they're gone. At the end of the exchange, the Phoenix warriors scored 1 wound. They also have a standard and musician, which give them 1 point each, for a total of 3. The giant just caused the 1 wound, but he has the fear attribute, which gives him a die 3 bonus to his combat result. The roll comes up as a 6, which means he gets the full 3 points for a total of 4, and he wins the fight. The warriors must back off and need to take a morale test, which they pass. Now both units are fatigued. If they fight under close combat this turn, they will only be able to hit on 6s. The Wolf Riders continue to pick at the archers, who fail their morale test and become wavering. This means they can't do anything on their next activation, which is bad. The Heavy Cavalry charges the archers. This is really bad for the archers. Each member of the cavalry unit has 2 impact attributes. That gives them 2 free hits before the combat has even started. With 11 members in the cavalry unit, the archers need to roll 22 saves on an A6. Unsurprisingly, there is nothing left of the goblins but a thin green paste. With the enemy unit destroyed, the cavalry unit get a free move of 3 or a pivot of up to 180 degrees. They turn to face the flank of the goblin spear wall. On the western flank, the goblin archers cut down the remaining elves, while the bolt thrower picks off some goblin wolf riders. In the center, the giant charges back at the Phoenix warriors. This time they're only able to hit on a 6, but they still manage to score 1 wound each. The giant rolls 2 points for fear, which turns the loss into a draw. The giant backs off, but no morale check is needed. Later I realized that the elves should have gotten an extra point because the rules give points for full rows including the first. Oh well. On the other side of the hill, the elven spearmen take a risk and charge into the goblin unit. This is especially dangerous as the goblin spearmen have the phalanx attribute. This means anyone who charges them from the front loses any special effects based on the charge, and must take a dangerous terrain test. The charging unit must roll 1 die for each member, up to a maximum of the number of members in the first 2 ranks of the phalanx. In this case 11. On a roll of 1, the charging unit takes a wound. Not a hit, a wound. Armor doesn't help. And 2 elven spearmen die skewered on goblin pikes. In combat, the elves cut down 3 goblins, but the goblin boss and the rest of the gobos tear apart 7 elves in return. At the end of the fight, the elves have 3 points, plus 2 for their standard musician, plus 2 for having 2 full ranks, a total of 7. The goblins have 9, plus 2 for standard musician, plus a whopping 5 full ranks for a total of 16. Despite the beatdown, the elven morale holds and they make an orderly retreat. Anticipating a heavy cavalry charge in the next turn, the goblin unit pivots around. They can probably survive a spearman charge to their flank, but a heavy cavalry charge without the protection of the phalanx would easily break them. With the lone elf cavalrymen riding in from behind the woods, the turn ends. No objectives change hands, and the one in the middle is still up for grabs. Trying to eliminate the heavy cavalry problem, the goblins charge into the elven heavy cavalry. Since they charge, they cannot use phalanx, but the elven cavalry cannot use impact, because they are on the receiving end of a charge. The goblins cause 8 casualties. The remaining elves cannot win this fight. With the elf prince's 3 attacks and the surviving 3 cavalrymen, they can at best kill 6 goblins and score a total of 8 with their standard musician. The goblins on the other hand have 8 casualties, a standard musician of their own and 5 ranks for a total of 15. For this reason, they did not strike back, saving the energy for a fight they could hope to win. It was a risk as they could fail morale and rout, but they passed. The bolt thrower fires at the wolf riders and causes a morale test, which they fail. I took them off the table, which was a mistake. Units which fail a morale test due to shooting do not rout, they become wavering. The stone thrower shoots at the Phoenix warriors again, but misses. The Phoenix warriors charge giant again, but are easily swept away. This time they fail their morale test, which is really bad. If a unit fails a morale test in close quarters, it usually wavers. However, if the unit has lost half of its number, it gets taken off the table. And there go the Phoenix warriors. As the Goblin regiment in the west closed in on the bolt thrower, the elven spearmen launched their assault into the goblins on the hill. The exhausted goblins were almost helpless, and 5 goblins were lost against the single elf casualty. The goblins failed their morale test, but the horde was still above half strength and only wavered. In return, the giant smashes to the side of the elven spearmen. Tired from the fight with the Phoenix warriors, it only takes down 1 elf, but the survivors are unable to do anything to it. Terrified, the elves fail their morale check and rout. The last light cavalry charges into the stone thrower screaming vengeance, inflicting some serious damage. The last remaining unactivated unit is the heavy cavalry. Here I do a Leroy Jenkins and charge into the goblin spearmen. This is a terrible idea. Although the goblins are wavering and will only hit on 6s, they still have a phalanx. As I mentioned before, that means that units charging from the front don't get any benefits from charging, so the heavy cavalry cannot use impact. They still cause some damage, but take some casualties in return and lose the combat due to the superior number of the goblins. They still manage to pass their morale check and retreat in good order. At the end of the turn, the goblins take the objective on the hill, as the only unit within 3 is the giant. At the beginning of the last turn, the goblins charge the bolt thrower and cause 2 wounds. The bolt thrower crew fight back, but they lose and fail their morale check, leaving the table. The light cavalry finish off the stone thrower. The goblin spearmen activate. They remove the wavering status, but can't really do anything else. The archers shoot at the giant for no effect. Next, the giant moves up between the heavy cavalry and the objective. I could charge the heavy cavalry, but there is a risk of the giant losing the fight and routing. By blocking their path, there is no risk of that happening, and there is not enough room for the cavalry to sneak in. Since the goblin spears are between the giant and the cavalry, there is no way they can maneuver to charge him either. The heavy cavalry can't really do much at this point, and they just move off, leaving the goblins in control of 3 out of 5 objectives, a win for the goblins. There are a lot of things I like about this system. First, the alternating activation is a lot more engaging. There are never long spans of time where you're just watching your opponent move. Second, games are fast, easily half the duration of a game of Warhammer, with the same points cost. Finally, the rules are very concise and easy to remember after a couple of games. I miss a few things from Oldhammer, mainly the random stuff that makes for some really entertaining games, but in the interest of keeping the rules simple, some sacrifices have to be made, and it's not like you have to choose one or the other. I can easily see myself playing one-page rules when I want to cram in several games, or settling down for a nice long game of Warhammer when I have time. For wargaming beginners though, these rules are gold. They're clear enough to pick up easily, so you can focus on learning things like maneuvering and the interaction between special rules, instead of trying to figure out which page the rules for morale are on. If you want to move on to a meteor system once you've learned the ropes, having this practice will really help. I have not tried the default Age of Fantasy yet, and I do not think I will try the skirmish version. The latter is because skirmish games involve far fewer troops and benefit from more detailed rules. Besides, I already have a favourite skirmish system, which is Wartime. Heck, it's still my favourite tabletop game 23 years on. The Regiment version though, definitely worth a spin. Again, the page is linked below. If you want to see how a similar game plays out in 4th edition Warhammer, check out the video here. And if you want to see some proper terrain miniatures, I have a playlist for that too. Bye!